Money has always moved. That's the point. Even in ancient times, money moves along trade routes. Money is designed to work and do jobs and change hands. On today's episode of The Life of Money, we're going to focus on an object that very specifically, intentionally was designed to not move. Today's money was designed for a prisoner of war camp, and it might be worth 1 mark inside the camp, but the money's no good outside the gate. So today's item is what's called a Lagergeld. Lagergeld is a form of emergency currency. It's kind of a larger category. And this particular Lagergeld is from the prisoner of war camp called Gnadenfrei. It's worth 1 mark. It was produced somewhere between 1915 and 1918. It's relatively small, very plain. I'm imagining the paper was probably white when they started it. uh, but I think the plainness is in fact the point. I mean, this is a prisoner of war camp. We're not going to waste resources on this kind of a thing. So the world that created this and gave this life was a late 19th century industrializing Germany. These countries they were transforming. They and all of these factories, the factories that were built to make locomotives can be used to make artillery. The steel that was, being created to build bridges also built battleships. And so this efficiency, this industrial efficiency drove economic growth, but it also drove the machinery that would lead to its own destruction. So by 1914, the industrialization of Europe was so complete that it's going to happen. So now what happens is there are alliance systems in Europe, and they're pretty rigid. You find that Germany and Austria-Hungary on one side had an agreement where they were going to, support each other. Attack one is attack of all, something of this nature. France, Russia, and Britain had their own set of alliances. And I mean, the whole idea was preventing war through mutual deterrence, because you don't attack somebody when you know that attack is attack on all of them. Okay, but it creates a system where it did the exact opposite. So a simple little thing, simple, listen to me, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 in June, it put this alliance to the test. I mean, these alliances, which were very rigid, did exactly what they were supposed to do. And within 6 weeks of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, all the major powers in the alliance systems were at war. So the war that the Great War that began in August of 1914, it was supposed to be over by Christmas. Okay. Clearly it didn't. It was 4 years of just industrialized slaughter. I mean, all of the industry which had been built was used for the war. And there were millions of prisoners, right? And millions of them. By 1916 or so, when this note was probably originally playing around, there were hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war in various places. And so we find that all of these prisoners of war had to have all of the mechanisms necessary to support them. POW camps. And you can see on this map here that there was POW camps spread all over Greater Germany. There was some that were in the industrial heartland. There were some that were out on the frontiers a little bit. There was 4 different kinds of camps. There was an enlisted men's camp. There was officers' camps. There was an internment camps for enemy aliens, and finally, POW military hospitals. Okay, so throughout World War I, there was about 2.4 million POWs in Germany. Our particular POW camp that we're interested in, as we said, was in Gnadenfrei. And Gnadenfrei is in Lower Silesia, which was part of Greater Germany at the time, but it is currently in Poland. It is now called, I don't know how to pronounce Piluag or something like that. I don't know. But the idea was Gnadenfrei itself was very rural, agricultural. It was it is what it is. But it was probably the prisoner of war camp was probably placed there because it was close enough to the rail lines and the factories that and the Eastern Front for that matter, so that you could think. But what's very interesting is the choice of Gnadenfrei as a place for a POW camp, because when translated, Gnadenfrei means freed by grace. Okay, so just wow. Okay, freed by grace. So there was also well in Gnadenfrei there was two different POW camps. One was a forced labor camp and one was an officers camp. And this note comes specifically from the officers camp. All right. What's interesting is that the prisoner of war camp for the officers was actually inside of a converted boys' school. And so just to think the enormity of the war compared to the tininess of little boys' school, it's a contrast that really interesting. So, what kind of things does this life have, this money have? I mean, it's very, very plain. All you basically see on here is Kommandantur. All right, we'll take it in English. Command headquarters of the officers, prisoner of war camp, Gnadenfrei. That's it. That's all that's on there, and one mark. Okay, there is no more. So what happened was, under the Geneva Convention, officers were exempt from labor. But they got their paycheck anyway. So what would happen is their home army would send their pay through a neutral mediating country, an intermediary. There we go. And then that money was then transferred to the prisoner of war camp, who then converted it into Lagergeld to be given in to the officers and used inside the camp. Okay. One of the key elements to converting their currency to this is that once you step out of the gates of Gnadenfried, you have no value. Good luck escaping. You've got nothing. Okay. So they can have a functioning economy without having to worry about it. Now, this particular bill, no, whatever, has three separate validation stamps on it. It has a purple circle that's on the reverse that seems to perhaps have been the first original mark, hard to tell. There's a pink rectangle one on the front, and then what appears to be the exact same pink rectangle one then on the back as well, with the stamps bleeding through the note on both sides. Okay. So I had a note exactly like it was identical to this, except instead of saying not and free, it said Torgau. And the only what happened was that Torgau note, by the way, had no stamps on it, none. It was absolutely, empty. So it's really not possible to know exactly what some local person was doing in this prison, and who knows, but it's very likely going to be like an accounting system of sorts. Let's say this is to say it has been issued, all right, so that there's a record that I received 1 mark worth of their currency, and I have issued this 1 mark, to make sure that people aren't just throwing them out there. But there's three of them, and so I'm just imagining if you've got a bunch of officers sitting around and they don't have to work, they got lots of time on their hands. You'd have to imagine something as simple and plain as this would be awfully easy to forge, okay? Awfully easy. But the validation stamps would add a level of complexity to a forgery that maybe, just maybe, that's what these stamps were representing, okay? So, what kind of value did this 1 mark have? In 1916, you could take a private in the German army, and they earned 53 Pfennig a day, right? 0.53 marks. And this note would cost almost 2 days of his military pay, almost 2 days. And if he, was getting his 53 Pfennig, this German private could afford about 1.5 loaves of bread a day. That's about what the German privates got working with. Thankfully, the German private probably actually gets his bread from the army, okay? Because otherwise, I think he's out of luck. A German worker, on the other hand, earns earned about 4.5 marks a day. So a German worker would take about 2 hours to earn this much money. But that German worker at a 4.5 mark salary can buy themselves 13 loaves of bread a day. I mean, hopefully what they're really doing is buying one loaf a day and they got the 12 loaves left over, right? How about that British officer? Doesn't even work, right? It's, I'm sure life ain't, a cakewalk for this British officer, but you get the idea. It would take approximately, well, they earned about 8.5 marks a day. So this was about 70 minutes of their pay. That's it, about 70 minutes. And that British officer, if they were going to spend their money on bread, could buy 24 loaves a day. So think about the inequality that's built into this system. The officers are making double what the workers are making out on the outside of the camp, and look at the poor German private. I mean, what is that? 17-to-1 ratio. So the officers that they're guarding are making 17 times more. I'm not sure I'd be happy with that setup. So what does this thing hold? What value? Well, if you want to go buy something in German marks, you're out of luck. Okay. Not only was there that whole POW camp thing, but the German mark is no longer usable. So in some kind of a way, it has no value. Now, I read some things about Lagergeld, and it was so cool. Oh my gosh, that's a new cool category to explore. But I thought for sure this stuff is going to be out of control, crazy expensive, right? There's no way a normal. This is a museum thing or something. But now I got it for $15.25 a few weeks ago. No problem. So we find that it also, and again, I went back on eBay and looked and found a buy it now and found pretty much the same note. It had the same stamps, but they were in slightly different locations, otherwise same, and it was 15.25. I wonder if that's the same person I bought mine from. Could be. I don't know. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit like and subscribe.